Have you ever lived with someone you thought you knew, but later discovered you never really knew them at all? What if the person you shared your home with wasn't who they claimed to be? This is the story of how moving in with two new roommates turned into the darkest, most terrifying experience of my life. The new roommate I had been searching for weeks when I found the apartment. It wasn't anything special, just a second-floor walk-up in an aging brick building. The kind with faded green carpet in the hallways and buzzing fluorescent lights that made everything look washed out. The rent was cheap, too cheap, and when I asked why, the landlord just shrugged and muttered something about slow turnover. The ad I'd answered wasn't just for the unit, it was for a roommate. His name was Ethan. When I first met him, he seemed perfectly normal. Early 20s, like me, average build, brown hair, cut short, polite, but reserved. He said he worked nights at some shipping warehouse, and that's why the place was so affordable. He needed someone to cover half the rent. The deal sounded good, and after a short tour, I signed the papers and moved in. Ethan's room was at the end of the hall. Mine was closer to the kitchen. Between us, the apartment was nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small living area. But at least it felt like a step forward in life. Moving out of my parents' house had been a relief. And Ethan seemed like the kind of quiet, responsible roommate you wouldn't have to worry about. The first couple of weeks were fine, almost too fine. He was barely around. I'd leave for work in the morning and come home to silence, his door shut, sometimes locked. Occasionally, I'd catch him in the kitchen heating up instant noodles or pouring himself coffee. But even then, he hardly said a word. Always polite. Hey, good night. Take it easy. But nothing deeper. One night, about 3 weeks in, I heard him laughing in his room. It startled me, only because it was the first time I'd heard any noise from him other than footsteps. I froze in the living room, holding my phone in my hand, just listening. His laugh was strange, not fake, not forced, but almost misaligned. Like it lagged a beat behind whatever was supposed to be funny. And then, abruptly, it stopped. I remember glancing at the clock. It was 2:14 a.m. I went to bed, unsettled, telling myself maybe he was just watching some late-night comedy show. But something about it didn't sit right. The following week, I noticed he didn't have much stuff. His room, when I passed by with the door slightly ajar, looked bare. A bed, a dresser, and a single chair. No posters, no books, no photos, not even clothes scattered around, like he'd just arrived or was planning to leave at any moment. Still, I told myself not to judge. Not everyone decorates right. Some people like things simple, but the feeling lingered. And the more time passed, the stronger it got. Ethan wasn't like other roommates. He was a presence in the apartment, yes, but somehow he felt less and less real. Chapter 2. Strange absences. At first, I chalked it up to his night shifts. Ethan was rarely home during the evening, and when I woke up for work in the morning, his door was always closed. But after a while, the pattern began to bother me. Sometimes he'd vanish for days. I'd come home Friday night expecting to hear him moving around, but the apartment would be silent. No footsteps, no TV, no sound of the bathroom sink running. Then, just as suddenly, he'd reappeared or shut, lights off under the crack, the faint creak of the bed as if he'd never left. The strangeness crept in gradually. One evening, I was walking past his room when I heard it again, that laugh. Low, breathy, like it had been forced through a filter. This time, though, it wasn't followed by silence. There were words, muffled, impossible to make out, but definitely conversation. I paused, ear tilted toward the door, straining to catch even a phrase. Nothing, just a steady murmur, like someone whispering through fabric. Ethan. I finally called, knocking gently on the door. The whispering cut off immediately. The silence was sudden, absolute. For a long moment, I just stood there, hand against the wood, waiting for a response. The door creaked open half an inch. Ethan's face appeared in the gap, pale eyes half-lidded, like I'd woken him from a trance. "Yeah," he said, voice flat. "I thought I heard you talking to someone," I said, carefully. His eyes lingered on me too long, like he was trying to figure out how much I'd heard. Then he smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "It's just on the phone," he said. And with that, he closed the door again. The next morning, I checked the call log on the apartment's shared Wi-Fi network. No calls, no activity from his devices at all. After that, things only got weirder. I began to notice food missing from the kitchen. A loaf of bread I'd bought would shrink by half overnight. Milk cartons emptied faster than I could drink them. But whenever I asked Ethan, he just shook his head. Wasn't me. One Thursday night, around midnight, I came home from work late. As I put my key into the lock, I froze. From inside the apartment, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing from the kitchen to the hall, and then back again. I braced myself, unlocked the door, and stepped in. The lights were off. Silence. Ethan's door was closed. I stood there in the dark living room, my pulse hammering in my ears, trying to convince myself I hadn't heard what I knew I had. Later, lying in bed, I swore I heard it again. Not footsteps this time, but a voice, low, hushed. It was Ethan's, but there was no reply. Just him, whispering steadily into the darkness, like someone was listening on the other side. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever he was talking to wasn't there at all. Up to 3, the disappearance. It happened on a Sunday morning. I woke up late, sunlight streaming through the blinds, the faint hum of traffic outside. Everything felt normal until I noticed something strange. Ethan's door was wide open. That was unusual. He always kept it shut, locked, as if guarding some private world inside. Curious, I padded down the hall and peeked in. Empty. Not just empty of Ethan, but empty of everything. The bed was neatly made. The dresser drawers were bare, the chair gone. His closet, once filled with a handful of shirts and jackets, was stripped clean. The room looked as if no one had ever lived there. My first thought was that he'd moved out overnight, but he hadn't said anything. No goodbye, no warning, no explanation. His rent was due in 2 weeks. Why would he vanish without a word? I called his name, half expecting him to pop out from the bathroom with that flat stare of his. Nothing. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number. The call failed instantly. Number not in service. Confused, I went to the landlord. He was a squat man with thick glasses and a permanent scowl, always smelling faintly of cigarettes. When I asked about Ethan, his eyebrows knitted together. "Who? My roommate?" I said. "Ethan, the guy who signed the lease with me." The landlord shook his head slowly. "Kid, you signed that lease alone." "Always lived here alone." My stomach dropped. I pulled out the crumpled copy of the lease from my desk drawer later that night, desperate to prove him wrong. My signature was there, but no one else's. Ethan's name wasn't anywhere on the document. Still, I knew I hadn't imagined him. His door had been locked. His voice had echoed down the hall. I had eaten the noodles he left half-finished in the sink. He was real. He had to be. But then, where was he? Chapter 4. Gaslighting Reality. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind, but the evidence kept unraveling around me. I scrolled back through my phone. Texts I'd exchanged with Ethan, the ones about splitting groceries, about him paying his half of the utilities, about locking up when he came home late. They were gone. Entire threads erased, as if they'd never existed. I messaged a friend who had come over for drinks one night. "Remember Ethan, my roommate?" His reply came fast. "What are you talking about? You've never had a roommate." I insisted. Reminded him of the night he'd sat on the couch, beer in hand, talking to Ethan about sports. He denied it, flatly. Said I must be confusing him with someone else. It only got worse. I dug through old photos on my phone. There was one from a bar 3 months ago, me, Ethan, and 2 co-workers. Except when I opened it, the space where Ethan should have been was empty. My arm hung around thin air, my smile aimed at nothing. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. The shadows on the wall were wrong. There was a shape there, a darker outline that didn't belong, like the faint echo of a figure that had been erased. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the apartment, every groan of the pipes, felt loaded with meaning. And then, one morning, I found something. In the bathroom, behind the sink pipes, tucked where no one would casually look, was a scrap of paper, faded, edges torn. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were 3 words: "You'll forget me." The journal, the silence of the apartment, gnawed at me. Ethan had been gone for 3 days without a word. His door, usually locked, stood slightly ajar. Against my better judgment, I pushed it open. The air inside felt heavy, stale, as though no one had lived there for years. The mattress was bare except for twisted sheets. On the floor, tucked beneath the bed frame, I found a notebook. The cover was battered and stained, pages curled at the corners. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. Inside were names columns of them, scrawled in messy handwriting. Some had dates next to them. Others were crossed out. Beside a handful of names, there were disturbing little notes. Stayed too long. Watched me sleep. Gone now. The strangest part was that my name was there too, written at the bottom of the page, not crossed out, just waiting. I flipped through the journal with shaking hands. There were drawings in the margins, faces, crude but recognizable. And one face chilled me to my core. It was mine, etched in jagged pen strokes, eyes hollow, mouth twisted into an expression of fear. I snapped the journal shut, a cold sweat breaking over my skin. What was this? Some sick joke? Evidence of something worse? That night, I barely slept. I kept the journal on my nightstand, staring at it as if it might move on its own. In the quietest hours of the night, I swore I heard something, the scrape of fingernails against the drywall just behind my bed. Chapter 6. The Return. 2 nights later, I was jolted awake by a sound I'll never forget. Slow, measured breathing. Not my own, his. It came from the other side of the wall, right where my headboard pressed against plaster. My heart slammed against my ribs. I whispered into the darkness, "Ethan." No reply, just steady, deliberate inhales and exhales. Gathering every ounce of courage, I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and crept toward Ethan's room. His door was wide open. The bed was stripped bare, the chair overturned. But on the wall above the mattress, I saw something new and opening. A square panel had been pulled aside, exposing a narrow crawl space. The beam of my flashlight cut into the black void. For a second, there was nothing. Then, 2 eyes gleamed back at me. I staggered backward, dropping the flashlight. By the time I picked it up again, the eyes were gone. The crawl space was empty, or at least, it looked empty. The following day, I called the landlord, demanding answers. He sighed, like he'd been expecting a call. "You're not the first tenant to complain about noises. Look, just keep your head down, finish your lease, it'll be fine." "Fine," I shouted. "There's someone living in the walls." He hung up on me. That night, I locked my bedroom door, shoved a chair under the knob, and slept with a bat in my hands. Still, I woke around 3 a.m. to a sound worse than the breathing, a whisper next to my ear. "I've been here longer than you think." Chapter 7. The Phantom Tenant. I fled the apartment the next morning, crashing at a friend's place for 2 nights. When I returned to gather my things, the apartment was too quiet. I half expected Ethan to be sitting in the living room, waiting. Instead, I found something else. Taped to my door was a sheet of paper from the journal. My name, circled 3 times. Underneath, in Ethan's handwriting, "Your turn." I nearly left everything behind. But something pulled me toward the crawlspace again. I climbed into Ethan's room, flashlight trembling in my hand, and pointed it inside. The space stretched farther than I thought, winding like veins through the building. My light passed over discarded food wrappers, water bottles, scraps of clothing. Then I found a little alcove inside, a filthy mattress, more drawings taped to the wall, and bones, small ones, animal maybe, at least I hoped they were. Pinned above the mattress was a newspaper clipping. Local man found dead in apartment. Roommate vanished. The date was from 6 years ago. Suddenly, it clicked. Ethan wasn't the first. He wasn't even the beginning. This building had a history, one scrubbed from the records, hidden behind plaster and silence. Whoever or whatever Ethan was, he wasn't just my roommate. He was part of something older, something that fed on anyone foolish enough to move in. I bolted from the crawlspace, chest tight, lungs burning. But when I returned to my room, my window was open. On the sill, drawn in dust, was a single word: stay. Chapter 8. The final night I should have left that moment. Packed a bag, never looked back. But fear has a way of freezing you in place. I told myself I'd leave in the morning. That night, every sound in the apartment was magnified: the groan of pipes, the hum of the refrigerator. Then came the breathing. Not from behind the wall this time, but from inside my room. I gripped the bat, scanning the darkness. "Where are you?" I whispered. A chuckle rose from the corner. Ethan stepped forward, or at least something wearing Ethan's face. His skin looked stretched too tight, eyes sunk deep, mouth curling into that same wrong smile. "You shouldn't have read it," he said, voice layered, like more than one person was speaking at once. I swung the bat, but he melted backward into shadow, slipping through the wall as if it were water. The journal was gone from my nightstand. In its place was a new page, blank except for a single line, written in fresh ink. "People will move in after you. Don't worry, you'll have company." That was the last night I spent in the apartment. I ran before sunrise, never to return. Sometimes, though, when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I still hear it. It's that slow, deliberate breathing, just on the other side of the wall.